Hello and welcome. This is an 18-part series on the book The Ladder, a love letter to my sisters in the pew. And I'm going to be reading sections of this book that I put together. So who is this for? It's for anybody who self-identifies with this topic. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me. I grew up in a Christian home and I was married for 9.5 years to a man at the time. I just knew something was wrong, but I really couldn't put my finger on it. And eventually I realized it was not a good marriage, that it was actually abusive, and I really don't like that term. I still don't like that term, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And ended up leaving. And I've been out of that marriage for many, many years, and I'm not a specialist on the topic. I'm simply someone who's been there and am feeling like I need to keep talking about it, because this is a love letter to my sisters in the pew who are still in that situation. While I was there, I didn't feel like I was getting any teaching, especially from the church, what those relationships look like, and more importantly, that God did not expect me to tolerate it. So that's what this is about. My first session is on don't be surprised to think that that's not me. So don't be surprised to think that's not me. I would have never identified as being in an abusive relationship. So if that's where you're at, that's okay. I'm going to start with abuse is easier to deny than admit. This is actually a section, and if you've got the book, you can follow along. If not, I'm just going to read. This is a section that I am sharing some things about my marriage. I was married to this man for 9 years. If you had approached me a few months before leaving and told me that I was in an abusive marriage, I would have argued with you, passionately probably. I would have told you were crazy. Lost in a deep layer of shame and denial, I would have vehemently denied it and defended him, vehemently defended him. Oof, I can't say that word. I would have defended him. I would have told you what a wonderful husband he was, that you're crazy, that he's no way abusive. It is important to realize that it may take months or years for a victim to hold firm to the idea that she is in fact being abused. This is actually a quote from Darby Strickland's book, It Is Abuse, and I'm going to read it again. It is important to realize that it might take months or even years for a victim to hold firm to the idea that she is in fact being abused. So 117, abuse is foreign. This is the next topic, abuse is foreign. And it's foreign for lots of reasons, but I certainly think partly because we're not around abuse a lot, especially if we grow up in a Christian home. It's not something that we see. I grew up in a loving home with 2 parents and went to church, and I certainly didn't think I saw any abuse in my life. So this just reads, abuse is so foreign to most people that when it begins to creep in a home, it's a mix of denial and confusion. The spouse is already blaming her, so she scrambles to fix what must be her fault. Then additionally, the church has their promises that prayer is the answer and that God can fix any problem. It often takes years for the wife to recognize her husband's behavior is abusive. So again, the same thing, the spouse is already blaming herself. That's pretty common because he blames her. And then 23, doing this is way out of my comfort zone. But I'm here because I feel like it's important. This is actually a quote from a book by Miller. It says, Ellie would not have denied her unhappiness. Even her parents saw that, nor would she have denied her confusion over Roger's behavior, or hurt that poured out of her frequent tears over his coldness and the distance he kept. However, the word abuse would have never entered her mind. He's under stress and I have to be patient, she tells herself. Or I expect too much. Then she would try harder to please Roger and fail again and again and again. So, common. Abuse is foreign. We don't self-identify with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is abuse. Page 23, I have a little bit here. When we hear the term abuse or abusive husband, the images go to men who are kicking or punching or choking their wives. And these are those visual clues of physical abuse. This type of abuse is inexcusable, and discussing the secondary type is not intended to dismiss the first. Yet this other type of abuse exists, which is emotional and verbal and psychological, and that was my situation. And then I'm going to share a term that I had not heard until the last couple of years, which I really like. It's called coercive control. And it reads, domestic abuse in which a perpetrator subjects a spouse, partner, or close relation, so domestic abuse in which a perpetrator subjects a spouse to a sustained pattern or repeated act of controlling, threatening, or humiliating behavior. So that is abuse as well. And then I want to go over what does Scripture say. And Scripture says actually quite a bit. And I certainly didn't know this at the time. As I said, I personally struggle with the word abuse and abusive relationships as they sound like they're referring to physical violence. Yet the word abuse is defined to make bad or wrong use of. And that is exactly what men like my husband did. Husbands are commanded to treat their wives as Christ loved the church. Abusive husbands make wrong use of their wife in their God-given role. Abuse is further defined as treat badly. Abusive husbands treat their wives badly. They fail to love and cherish them. And then I have some more verses that I want to share. This is page 37, both these verses. Colossians 3:19 says, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. I'm going to read it again. Colossians 3:19, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. And this is Ephesians 5:23, and this is from the Message. It says, the husband provides leadership to the wife the way Christ does the church, not by domineering, but by cherishing her. And I think that's actually already what I went over. So this last part is called the invitation. Excuse me. I wrote this at the very beginning. The word invitation in the dictionary is a written or verbal request inviting someone to go somewhere or do something. So first and foremost, this is an invitation for any sister in the pew who in some way self-identifies with this topic. This is an invitation to offer to bring about a change in your perception. As with any invitation, it is here for those who want to accept this information, but is in no way intended to force you to believe it or accept it. This information is free for the taking or the leaving. It is not my goal to convince you that you should or should not do something. I want to share my understanding of what is true and some of the things that I've learned in Scripture. and attempt to lead you through a better understanding of an unhealthy versus a healthy relationship. But the best news is it is completely up to you, free to choose. And thinking on how I was going to close, oh, I forgot my eraser. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but at the end of my journey with my husband, I left and I was at a domestic violence shelter. I took a long bus ride and finally arrived. For reasons I'll go in later, I was afraid. Some threats had been made and I was afraid. And on the wall in the mirror, it said, oh, now I'll lose my thought. Eventually you learn the subtle difference between holding a hand and chaining a soul. Eventually you learn the subtle difference between holding a hand and chaining a soul. And those words just really jumped out at me, the subtle difference between holding a hand and chaining a soul. And I realized that's where I'd been. And I really love the word subtle because I do feel like these relationships, especially ones that are verbally abusive or emotionally abusive and isolating and controlling, they can just be so subtle. I looked up the definition for subtle and it says difficult to describe, complex. Such a good description of these relationships. And then the other thing that jumped out at me is it said making use of clever and indirect methods to achieve something. And unfortunately, this is what you see often by the abusive husband, is they are cleverly deceitful. So anyways, that is session 1. I'll say bye for now. And I've got 17 more sessions. They're all going to be on YouTube. My one and only goal is to just get some information out there about the book. It's only 99 cents on Kindle form, and also on Amazon as a book form. It's only $10. I tried to keep it as cheap as possible only to get this in your hands, but I've got 17 more sessions coming. So thanks. Bye for now.